Welcome to our fire risk assessment seminar, which is specifically focused on the restaurant industry. It's supported by the Office for Product Safety and Standards and within the Department for Business Energy and Industrial Strategy. I'm joined here today with Raj Baksi from East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service and Vicky Kotsiou, who is the owner of the Great Greek Restaurant in Eastbourne. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristian.
Vicky, when we've been talking about fire risk assessments within the restaurant industry, it was really interesting hearing your thoughts around your experiences about creating them and then also owning your own business.
Well, hi, Kris, and hi, Raz. Thank you for having me over. As you mentioned, Kris, I'm Vicky. I'm the owner of the Great Greek Restaurant in Victoria Place in Eastbourne. And, you know, me being not being a native speaker and coming from a different legislative background, it's always been a struggle to understand the risk assessment process. And so I was wondering whether the risk assessment signposted in the Pink Book is actually suitable for use from a restaurant perspective.
Yes, absolutely. So it may seem as a small business that the legislation seems like a huge burden, but if you follow the guidance in the Pink Book that you've referred to, it talks you through the 5 stages of carrying out the fire risk assessment and gives you guidance on how to achieve your legislative requirements. I think it's important to highlight that the risk assessment should be a live working document. So it's not something that's performed annually and then put away in a drawer. It should be something that's at the forefront of your mind to ensure that you're not only meeting legislative requirements, but of course also not having the impact of a fire, because of course we know the damaging impact that can have upon your livelihood.
Thanks for that, Raj. I think as well, what's quite interesting with the setup of businesses in Eastbourne is that we've got a very high density of independent businesses. So they're all owner-operators rather than sort of large chains. And I think that interesting point that Vicky made about coming from a different country, and we see that we've got very international presence, Vicky, haven't we, in terms of restaurant owners? Raj, I wondered if you could talk through the 5 stages of a risk assessment, just to go through that with us.
Yes, of course, absolutely. So the first stage is to identify what fire risks exist within your organisation. So of course, we're thinking about ignition sources and fuel sources. When we think about catering, of course, it's inevitable that the kitchen is an area of significant risk. So we are performing hot activities. So it's maintenance and testing of all your frying equipment, cooking equipment, ovens. Of course, it depends on what type of cooking activity that you perform, extractor fans. You know, we're looking at what type of risk may exist within those areas. If I just grab the extractor as an example, you know, of course, it's routinely cleaned and maintained, and this should be documented to ensure that if a fire does start on the stove top, it shouldn't then go into the extraction system and cause a significant fire within your organisation. So the risk assessment would look at what hazards are there, what risks are there, and then what maintenance procedures exist to ensure that the risk is kept as low as practicably possible. And of course, you know, I'm not suggesting that it should be pristine every single second of the day. Of course, you're trying to run a business as well, and these things do have frequent use. So it's ensuring that you've got a maintenance schedule in place to ensure that these things are maintained to the appropriate standard. But of course, I'm supposed to be talking about the 5 stages. So the step 1 is identify the fire hazards. Step 2 is to see who's at risk. So of course, that's all your employees and all of your customers and people that visit the site. And you may well have neighbouring organisations as well, whether that be other shops or it might be upstairs residents. So we're seeing who's at risk and how they'd be warned in the event of a fire. I mean, that's just an example of identifying who's at risk and the reason for doing so. The next stage is to evaluate what existing risks we have and to either remove them altogether or to find ways of ensuring that they're maintained at an appropriate level. And of course, I've talked a little bit about those already. And then we're recording, documenting and informing staff of the findings or the significant findings. So of course, that's staff training. And if you think about staff training in the very basics, it's how to raise the alarm, how to call the fire service, how to manage the evacuation. It might involve turning things off, isolating heat sources, making things safe as we exit the building. Of course, alternative exits. So there's the front door, but are there alternatives? Would visitors, customers think to use them, quite possibly not, so staff trained to steer and guide people to the safest and most direct means of escape. And of course, simple things like calling the fire service, being confident, having a fire alarm, understanding how that works. If you have a fire panel, staff knowing how that works as well. And then of course, review. And I mentioned briefly already that the risk assessment should really be seen as a working document. I mean, yes, it is sensible to review it and a requirement in the legislation to review on a frequent basis, but also to keep it open. And we've been talking a little bit about the return from COVID. And of course, that's a time in particular when we may need to revisit the risk assessment to ensure we've done everything we can as reasonably practicable to ensure the safety of our customers, our staff, and of course, the safety of the business.
Did you have any questions on that, Vicky?
So yeah, I'm hearing that me as a business owner, I'm able to do the risk assessment on my own. But I'm assuming there's experts out there that would be able to hire. So in the past, at the very beginning of my business, I've had issues with people or companies that claim to be experts, and indeed, in reality, they weren't. So is there any specific place where we can find, who's a legitimate business and who's not?
Yes, absolutely. So there are industry standards and there is accreditation. So companies like those that supply and maintain fire extinguishers and fire alarms, there's things like BAFE, that's the British Approvals of Fire Equipment, and also the IFE, the Institution of Fire Engineers, that are organisations that we can use to identify the credibility of third-party suppliers. Of course, it's unfortunate that there are organisations out there, suppliers of services, who may not meet the requirements or provide a standard that isn't quite what is required for your business. So in terms, particularly for the fire risk assessment, the Institution of Fire Engineers provide a register of competent risk assessors, and that's where you can be more confident in selecting. There's a common misconception, unfortunately, that people that have worked in the fire industry automatically can carry out a fire risk assessment, but it's really important to highlight that simply isn't the case. They need to be credible themselves, and therefore seeking accreditation, as you've said, is important. The IFE is a good source of information. And on our website, that's ESFRS.org, we actually have a guide to choosing a competent risk assessor. So there's some documentation and information. It's not heavy, it's only a couple of pages that gives you a steer on what to look for and how to go about procuring a suitable risk assessor.
Do you think that would be helpful, Vicky, for other restaurant members?
Absolutely, very helpful. And if I may ask, are there any courses that I could go and take, in an effort to understand a bit more about the fire risk assessment?
Yes, there is. There's two sources of training that we provide as an organisation. Firstly, we do a free awareness course for people just like you. So it's for business owners, which basically provides an overview to the fire legislation and what your requirements are in terms of meeting it. So to summarise, it's the fire risk assessment, of course. It's about the possible use of third parties to help you meet your legislative requirements. And it's a little bit about understanding the impact of fire, how devastating that can be for organisations. So that's our short course available to help inform people about the legislation. And then we also run other courses to inform people, perhaps on a more practical basis, the impact of fire. So things like fire development, human behaviour, which is a fascinating subject. People often don't do what we want in a fire, so we need to be confident to recognise what can go wrong and how to be planned in advance to ensure that we have safety standards in place.
Raj, how would that work in terms of those courses? Would you get a group of businesses together, or is it just one business on their own?
Well, we recognise that given the current situation, businesses have so many things to contend with. So we're quite happy to run courses on a one-to-one basis for organisations. So, for example, if it was one restaurant, we'd happily provide a training course for them. If it was a group of restaurants like your association or a group of hotels, then that certainly can be addressed as well. We're currently running the courses as webinars. We're not doing face-to-face training because of the pandemic. And even after the pandemic, we will continue providing those webinars. I'm the trainer actually on the webinar, so I can assure you I've run webinars for 3 people, and I've run webinars for over 100 people. At the end of the day, we're happy to cater for your needs. And the other great thing about the webinar is that we'll run it at a time of day that suits you. So if you said to me, for argument's sake, because of other commitments, you can't do the daytime, I'd happily do an evening. And that will continue even after we go back to a sense of normality.
And would the employees also be able to attend those seminars, or is it specifically for the business owners?
No, absolutely good question. So the employees will be very welcome to. In actual fact, the courses I run are aimed at the employees. They're aimed at those people that I refer to who are there to assist you in management of risk, in keeping an eye on fire doors, in making sure that things are functioning properly, and ensuring policies followed. You may be familiar with the term fire marshal or fire warden. That's the type of training that we provide. So it's giving your staff an understanding of fire safety and a confidence in how to help oversee fire precautions at a local level. I mean, I often say to people attending our courses, the person who does the risk assessment isn't there all of the time, every single day. And even if they were, they wouldn't be able to keep an eye on everything. Whereas your staff are able to keep an eye on some of the risks and things that I've described. The manager's course, which is run by our business safety department, is about giving you an overview of legislation. And that's, still can be accessed by staff, but it's less about the practicalities of fire safety and more about the management overview. So, the managers like yourself would be able to receive an update and an understanding pretty much along the lines of the conversation we're having now. So the fire safety order, the fire risk assessment, maintenance, how to maintain it, how to achieve it, and the consideration of using a third party. That's the kind of crux of the manager's course. And then the other courses we rather include that information at an appropriate level, and then also more detail about the ins and outs, if you like, of fire safety on a day-to-day basis within your business.
Okay, that's great to know. It certainly alleviates a bit of the stress around fire safety and conducting a fire risk assessment.
Absolutely. I ought to explain, we don't advertise actively that we run these courses, which is a shame. I would like to, but we're not for profit. And therefore, of course, we're not in the marketplace for proactive advertising. But we do happily respond to all the inquiries that we receive. And at the moment, we are getting gradually busier, which is very exciting, not only for us, but also you, in terms of seeing, some evidence of moving forward. But we understand, of course, that, this is a forced position that we've all been faced by. But at the moment, we've got several webinars running per week, all sorts of different organisations, residential care, hotels, restaurants, you name it. And it's all about improving safety. And I ought to add, we include home fire safety in our courses as well, which, is an extra tick in the box, if you like, for your staff, a little bit of looking after the staff, and not just about smoke alarms, about other things like counterfeit goods and not overloading sockets and registration of appliances, lots of other useful information too.
That's good. If you're getting busier on the training side today, that means we are getting safer in the long run.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been trying not to take my eyes off the camera, but I'm going to do it now. I'm in my office. I'm going to look at my board of current work, and I won't name the businesses, but I'll just tell you the type of businesses that have been training with us. So we've had an office-based charity. We've had a hotel and guest house in Brighton. We've had a historic building, in fact, 2 historic buildings. So they're like visitor centre type places. We've had a large distribution company in New Haven, a school, a charity that provides support to adults with learning difficulties, a regulatory organisation, a hospital, a food distributor. So there's quite a broad range of organisations there who have been attending our webinars, 2.5 hours of workplace fire safety input, and then half an hour, which is free of charge, of course, the end bit on home fire safety.
So, Vicky, you were saying about that your solicitor went through your lease and told you your obligations. Raj, in your experience with leases, obviously they can be quite difficult to understand, and they can vary depending on business to business or property to property.
Absolutely, and that's a really valid point that you've raised there. I think it's really crucial that as a business owner, you speak to your solicitor to get clarity that you need and confidence about your lease, because when you look at organisations, it may be that you've got a lot of organisations or individuals within the same block who may have different leases. So in order to gain clarity, you need a competent person from a solicitor to really get into an understanding of what this means to you.
Of course, because if what can happen, I suppose, is that you could be in a situation where you take on a lease and then your obligations are much more than you expected, which then potentially could cost you some money to bring you to that benchmark standard.
Absolutely, and that's very similar to the requirements around the fire safety. It's making the research from the early days, getting a good understanding of what your requirements are, so that you then aren't caught out by any nasty surprises later down the line. So what we're seeking from businesses is to reach a benchmark standard level. And if you refer to the Pink Guide, which was produced, of course, for the tourism industry, that provides you with an understanding of what is expected of you in order to achieve the benchmark standard. So it's simply a case of meeting your obligations and ensuring that your business is as safe as possible.
So Raj, you just went through the 5 stages of fire risk assessment, and I was wondering, would you be able to provide specific training on conducting a fire risk assessment?
That's a very common question that we're asked as an organisation, and unfortunately we can't give you step-by-step how to do the risk assessment because it's a conflict of interest for our organisation. So if I can just explain that, we are the enforcers of legislation. If we show you step-by-step how to do your risk assessment, and then someone else from our same organisation carried out an audit of your risk assessment and concluded that it wasn't satisfactory, the conflict of interest, of course, is that if we've trained you and then the assessment isn't, it's been taken away and done later after the training course, but then doesn't meet our requirements, of course, that's a problem for our organisation. So whilst we can't provide the risk assessment, I know that's not what you asked, but we can't give you a step-by-step help. There is some excellent support out there, and in particular, the Pink Book that was produced, just referring it to here on my left-hand side, it was produced by Visit England, and it's for the tourist accommodation. I just want to get the title right. That gives you a step-by-step guide on how to carry out the risk assessment. And then on top of that, of course, is the support and help of our business safety officers, of which I'm part of that team. So you can access them via our website, of course, by the telephone or email, and you can ask specific questions. So, it may be that they won't be able to give you an exact response, but they can signpost you in direction of the fire safety guides, approved standards. And of course, it has to be said that the Pink Book is a national standard. So if you have sites elsewhere, or perhaps you have business interests elsewhere, that guide can be applied right across your business rather than simply seeing that as a local document only. I think it's really important to highlight that we want to see you as businesses succeed. There's a lot of advice and information and guidance and help out there for businesses. And really, we just want to enable you to meet the legislative requirements, to thrive as a business, and to return to some sense of normality as soon as possible.